This channel has helped tens of thousands of people build houses in their backyards or convert part of their house into a home, like an apartment, and we just couldn't be more excited. This channel mostly focuses on ADUs, but I've gotten steeped over the years in every kind of housing reform and housing issue. And thanks to your support, watching this channel, I got to move to Washington, D.C. for 6 months, and I'm meeting with all the stakeholders, trying to figure out what housing policy we can advocate for on the national level. This is really important because so far all of our work has been concentrated in California, and it's true that the housing shortage is most intense in a lot of parts of California. There's also a big need for production around the country. There's actually a great report, I just realized I have it in my bag, that's lucky, visual aid. This is an underproduction report that's done by a group called Up for Growth. It's a good read that explains exactly how much we're missing our targets, just based on demographics. It's also a good example of the type of organization I've got to spend a lot of time with while I live in Washington, D.C. Up for Growth is a lot like my friends at YIMBY Action and YIMBY Law in California YIMBY, but they're focused at the national level. And there's a lot of groups like that. Think tanks, trade associations, nonprofits, policy advocacy groups, and lobbyists. There are all kinds of different organizations that I see as stakeholders in housing reform. And it's been a really exciting opportunity to meet all these people, build some relationships that I'll be able to sustain even when I move back to California. I actually get to talk to a lot of groups about how this is a problem that we can fix nationwide. If you only take one thing from this video, check out the video description below where there's going to be a petition you can sign. Politicians think that they have to do big, flashy housing policy, that they have to spend tens of billions of dollars to make a direct investment in zoning and housing. And actually, what I'm going to talk about is a much more affordable path, a much more popular path, and a path that will really work. But politicians need to believe that it gets people excited. And so that's why I want you to go down to the video description below and sign that petition and say, I'm excited about this wonky housing stuff that Ryan's talking about on YouTube. It's a big coalition of a lot of different forces. And there are a lot of actions we can take on the national level to improve housing and to create more housing at all levels of affordability. Having said that, I've gone through a lot of those different credible efforts in DC, and my strong belief is that a lot of these efforts have as many detractors within the housing movement as they have supporters. So I want to pick something that's going to be credible, that could actually get done. I want it to be popular. I can build a big coalition around it, and so no matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, you probably support this idea. I want it to have an impact. I think it needs to be big enough that will actually improve things and speed up the housing movement nationwide. But I also want it to be possible, that it can actually get done and that it won't cause more harm than good because of a few different intricacies of how the national government works. Having said all that, that's why I'm proposing the exceptionally exciting topic of taking the Department of Housing and Urban Development and asking them to do research and offer technical assistance. I told you it'd be exciting. Basically, when you have a big organization like HUD, and it is really limited in what it can do directly in housing. There's another book here that can answer some of this stuff. Hold on. This is a great book on the topic if you want to read a ton. It's called Fixer Upper. It's by Jenny Schuetz. And it's really good, from Brookings Institute. There's a whole chapter about national reform. I'm gonna show you a chart. I'll put a version of this chart up in the description below the video, but it shows you which parts of housing sit at the federal level and which parts sit at the state level. And then there's another chart shows you all the responsibilities that sit at the local level, like city or village or county, borough, and it divides those between things that a city has to do to implement a new policy and things that a city has to do to administer and keep the policy in place. For a huge number of reasons that it goes into, the federal government is not in a very good place to make bold policy moves. Like in the state of California, we passed a statewide ADU bill that makes it so that all cities and counties have to allow for ADUs. That's That's something that the federal government, you might think, oh, well, we should just pass that as a national law and say all states have to allow that. Actually, if we did that, that might be pretty disastrous for a number of reasons that you can go into in the book. But on the other hand, what the federal government would be very good at is helping all the states that want a better ADU policy to implement the perfect ADU policy. Or if there's things other than ADUs, and there often are, then the federal government can publish research about those other forms of missing middle or LIHTC, apartment buildings, or whatever it is, and say, hey, in some areas, this works better. In other areas, ADUs work better. Based on what you want in your state, here's some policy options. And that's the research part, right? We want HUD to do a bunch of research on all the best zoning reforms that are happening at the state level and publish that. And kind of publish why they think one worked, one didn't work, put all that into writing with the perspective of my reader is state legislators. My reader is state reformers who want better housing policy. Then the technical assistance involves that second chart I showed you where there's all the implementation steps. There are over 40,000 governing bodies in this country that are in charge of zoning in some way. That's, again, in this book, and it's cited from a US Census statistic. And it excludes unincorporated counties, so there's even more. But over 40,000 governing bodies. And on average, those governing bodies are tiny. I think something like 85% of those governing bodies are smaller than 10,000 residents. So very typically, you have a planning department with like one planner or two planners. So implementing these rule changes can be quite difficult, right? It takes a bunch of work to implement them without breaking your existing ordinances, and then it takes some work to keep them going on. But if you build them right, if you implement them right, you should have less administrative work moving forward. That's hopefully part of the research that HUD would release. So HUD can step in and offer technical assistance to cities and states that want to adopt these new policies. Those cities and states can say, hey, can we get some hours from HUD staff that are specialists in adapting these best practices to local policies, and then we'll pair you up with some local planners so that we can get the best policies in place for our region. This strategy really focuses on what is best about federal government. You've got these national institutions that are super centralized. They're not good at doing the detailed implementation in 40,000 different jurisdictions, but they are good at doing research on what everybody's done. If we focus that research on a California agency, for example, they would probably be overly focused on what California has done and what it could do to California. Whereas a national institution like HUD can be less biased, it can study all examples equally and come from the perspective of these solutions are going to work differently in different places and different jurisdictions based on things like the size of lots, the shape of lots, existing structures, natural barriers, economic conditions, legal history. All these things make housing reform vary wildly from one state to another. So it's important to not take a one-size-fits-all approach, but to issue research that really has a menu of options or a playbook to choose from. I mean, broadly speaking, we kind of know what this research will tend to indicate. It'll say, hey, you should allow more types of housing, different shapes and sizes. Relax your constraints around dimensional code, like how big structures can be. Make zoning and planning more predictable and also maybe faster. You should make sure that the local government and local planning authorities are less bogged down in the day-to-day, case-by-case project decisions. As long as projects fit an overarching plan, you don't need to be so obsessed with the minutia of what kind of cornices they put on the facade. Allow as-of-right development or other forms of more predictable development, where as long as I follow the rules, I get my permit. Go beyond the zoning code. You know, you could address the building code to make things more affordable or more versatile. You could address impact fees and other kinds of sort of disincentives that we place on developing housing. You could also look at environmental review, NEPA, and in states like California, CEQA. These are laws that really, they were designed to help protect the environment, but now they're often used to bog down projects on bases that really have nothing to do with the environment. Having said that, even though that's the broad advice we would expect to come out of the research, there are really different specific approaches you could take. For example, one state might have a lot of the best conditions in place for accessory dwelling units to be a great housing typology. Like, ADUs are a great way to add new homes in this state. On the other hand, in an urban environment with relatively large lots, you might say, hey, it doesn't make a lot of sense to put one single family house in the middle of this big lot and one ADU in the back. That's a historical thing. In this city, the best policy would actually be to develop townhomes on a lot of those lots. That's just a random example, but I think that was true in the American Enterprise Institute, another one of those groups that I visited. Had a policy analysis of Philadelphia, where ADUs were actually underusing lots compared to townhomes. And if you created paths for developers to do either, and they were equally easy for developers and equally predictable, then the developers would tend to use townhouses because they made better usage of the properties they were buying. And that's a great example. We don't want one size fits all. We want research that shows and advances, hey, there's different housing solutions that work in different places, more is more, let's implement a lot of these changes, right? But all this is hard because all 50 states come from different baselines. And so, there's different history, there's different legal structures, constitutional structures. So you really need to, you can't just issue one set of guidelines that every state can pass. You need to come up with the best practices and then help each state with technical assistance in building those practices into bills and then getting them to pass it through their state legislature. Now, why is this the weird policy path I picked? Hopefully you can tell I've talked to a lot of people, I've read a lot of the research, and I've lined up a lot of different credible policy things we can advocate for. I've linked to an article in the description below this video where if you scroll all the way down, you can read all about all the other policies that I'm not currently advocating for in this video. For advocacy purposes, you gotta pick one lane, you gotta push hard, you gotta build relationships and show that success is possible. And to do that, I've chosen a high impact policy. If we can get HUD to do this research and offer this technical assistance, it's gonna make a big difference. You're gonna see states adopting really incredible state-of-the-art housing reform. And statewide housing reform is a big key to success in the housing movement. We learned that from ADUs. I also like that this is actually feasible because HUD is open to it. There've already been meetings, there's working groups, they're taking this advice, but they just need to know that it's popular advice. They want to know that this is the right course of action, right? So we need to show that people can get excited about this and that there would be consumers of this research at the state level. So that's why the petition in the video description below is so important. Go sign the petition. It says to them, people like it, people will tell their state legislators to use it, people will tell their city politicians to use it if we make this research and offer this technical assistance. I also like that it's a snowball approach, or it's a build as you go approach. Some of the ideas that I talked about in the link below, they're very big ideas that you either do it or you don't do it. And it's very hard to do it halfway. This idea, on the other hand, we could get HUD to say, we're gonna use existing budget to do this amount of research, and we're gonna allot this many hours to technical assistance. And if it works, then they can start building a library and do more research next year and offer more technical assistance. If it doesn't work, it can also be reversed just as easily. So it's a very easy idea to say yes to. What's more, it's not controversial. So at one end of the political spectrum, a lot of people in the pro-housing movement are really scared of the national government getting involved because it's one size fits all, it's partisan politics that can really slow things down, and it's kind of big and slow and expensive. But so those people who are really afraid of the national government's involvement still are broadly supportive of this specific plan because it's concise, it's targeted, it's opt-in, and it's not one size fits all. And on the other side of the spectrum, I will say there's some cool ideas that involve the national government getting very involved, and again, between you and me and the rest of YouTube, I'm a yes in my backyard guy. So I tend to say yes to ideas. But those aren't what I'm gonna start with, right? I wanna start with coalition building efforts, things that almost everybody can agree to. Because once we have one success together, then we're a team. And I'll come back next year and find out what the next big idea we can tackle is. And I'll keep coming back and keep growing this team and growing our success and momentum until we're really delivering the kind of improvements that we've delivered in California's ADU movement. We're gonna be delivering those across the board in housing movements all across this country. And I cannot wait to report back to you on the successes we're having or the challenges, and it means the world to me. Let's build more housing.